In 2 Samuel chapter 13 tonight, talking about some delicate things. Let me give you a rundown before we start of the four sons of David that are the most prominent in Scripture. You have Prince Amnon, who's David's firstborn. He was born in Hebron to Ahinoam of Jezreel, and he is killed, as we'll find out this evening, by Absalom. Absalom is the number 3 son. There's a son in between named Kileab, who we know nothing about. We know that he existed, but he doesn't show up as an adult or have any kind of claim to the throne or do anything. He was actually the second son, so after Amnon is gone, it would seem that Kileab would have had a claim to the throne, but he never does. Absalom is the 3rd son, so having killed Amnon, he moves into first place and could possibly have been the king. At least he thought so. We'll talk about him some more later. And then Adonijah, who tries to take the throne as the 4th son, which would have made him second in line to Absalom, who is not around to make his claim. So Adonijah thinks it's his turn, being 4th in line. But we end up with Solomon being the actual next king over Judah. And all of this plays into what Nathan has already told David about his punishment for taking Bathsheba and killing her husband. He's not going to get off scot-free. He's told, you're not going to die, but some horrible things are going to happen. And most of those center around his 3rd son, Absalom, and we're going to begin seeing some of that from Absalom tonight. We've got a list of problems. I want us to just read the first 2 verses, and then we'll kind of give highlights or lowlights, as the case may be, from chapter 13. But chapter 13, verses 1 and 2 says, in the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, the son of David. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. And so problem number 1 is not when it says that Amnon loved her. Problem number 1 is when it says that he was obsessed with her. The rules were a little bit different in those days, and particularly among royal families. The idea that those two might have been a couple at some point is not out of the question. But the fact that he decided that he had to have her and became obsessed with her. If you look over at Matthew chapter 5, in verse 27, I'll remind you of something that Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount about the problem of lust. In our day and age, lust is kind of a foregone conclusion. It's not as concerning to people anymore. But here's what he said. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. So Jesus says there's a real problem when you become obsessed. I used to talk to my students when we were going through the Sermon on the Mount, ask them the question, how much is too much? If you like somebody, if you're attracted to somebody, how much is too much? And it was usually a very good conversation and kind of eye-opening, I think, for the guys when the girls would chime in and say that, a certain amount of attraction is a good thing and it pleases them to be attractive, but past a certain level, and it becomes creepy, and they're not as thrilled with it. So having a guy like them at first may turn into more of a problem than a benefit at some point. So here is Amnon, who is a half-brother of Tamar, and evidently she's a beautiful young lady. And he sees her, and the first reference is he loves her, but probably the more accurate statement is he was obsessed with her. Problem number two, he asks his cousin for help. He has an advisor named Jonadab. And Jonadab is the son of Shemiah, who is David's older brother. So if you think back, when Samuel came to the house and he said, the Lord has sent me here to anoint the next king over Israel. And they were trying to bring each of the sons by, right? Shemiah was one of the guys they brought by. He wasn't chosen. But he is royalty because he's connected to David. And his son is kind of working in the government. He's part of the program as an overseer, as a mentor for Amnon. So Amnon's having all kinds of problems, and Shemiah can see it. And Shemiah asks him, what's problem? And he tells him that he has fallen in love with Tamar, but there's no way that he can do anything about it. So it is Shemiah who gives Amnon the game plan for doing something to Tamar. Notice that phrase. Amnon is upset because she was a virgin and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Right? So he can't have what he wants, and it's fairly obvious what he wants. So he asks his mentor, and his mentor gives him absolutely terrible advice. Now, the advice works in the long run, but as far as moral, ethical, family relations, it's absolutely terrible that Shemiah was involved with this at all. But he does give Amnon the game plan that eventually causes even more problems. Amnon's problem kind of fits the definition of sin in James chapter 1. If you weren't here this morning, we're getting ready to go to James next in our Sunday morning Bible class. But in chapter 1, verse 13, James says, when you're tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. So Amnon has seen her, desired her, found out a way to pursue her, gotten help in figuring out the game plan so that he can have what he wants from her. And so here's the plan for Amnon to lure Tamar ever closer to danger, being alone with him. He's told the best thing you could do is fake an illness and ask your daddy, that is David, to have Tamar come to your house and take care of you. Now, if you're David and you have a virgin daughter and you have a son who says, out of all the people in the world that I think should come and take care of me while I'm ill, it's Tamar. Do you have a red flag or not? Maybe I'm just too suspicious, but for me that would have been a red flag. Once she gets there, she bakes him some bread. Okay, so that's innocent enough. But then Amnon asks everyone else to leave the house. So not only do I want Tamar to take care of me, I want Tamar to take care of me while you're somewhere else. And so all of the people that were at Amnon's house oblige. After all, he is the firstborn son of the king. He's the heir apparent. He can pretty well tell you what you're supposed to do, and you do it. So all of them left. He insisted that Tamar should feed him this food that she's made for him, and she agrees, and he says, well, okay, but I want you to feed it to me while I'm in bed. Now, bells and whistles and red flags and sirens and, anyone can see where we're headed. And I think probably Tamar at this point could understand what was going on and was not really wanting to be there anymore. But again, she's been told by David go take care of Amnon. Amnon is the heir apparent. He has told her what to do, and she does. He then insists that Tamar join him. She refuses, even offers an alternative. She says, David would allow us to get married. Your father's not going to keep me from you. If you want to have a legitimate relationship, just ask your father and he'll give you to me. And so again, in our culture, stepchildren, right, half brother, half sister here, don't get married. But in their culture, and especially among royals, it was not that ridiculous of an idea. If you study the middle centuries in England, those folks just did some really weird things, marrying brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles. And the kinds of marriages that they made were similar to this. But Amnon is not interested in marrying Tamar. Amnon wants to know what he can do to Tamar. This is an act of force. It's an act of aggression. It's not an act of love. That's why I think, going back to verse 1, we're not talking about how much he loved her. We're talking about how much he was obsessed with her. In verse 12, she says, "No, my brother, don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you." But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he took her by force. And so he has allowed himself not just to have the thoughts, but to come up with a plan on making the thoughts a reality, and then to follow through on those thoughts and to take her by force. And again, that has a lot of parallels with what Jesus is saying in Matthew. If a man looks upon a woman to lust after her, he's already committed adultery. The thought comes first, followed by the planning, followed by the completion of the plan. Problem number 3 has to do with what happens once you've gotten what you want. And so verse 15 says, Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." Now she's on the opposite end of the thing. She has to beg, "Can I please stay? After what's already happened has happened, maybe I could just stay and we could figure this out. Casting me out is worse than what you've already done." And Amnon, again, is not dealing with her because of love. He's dealing with her because of obsession and power. And so he is going to get rid of her. He doesn't need her anymore. He's already taken what he desired. And so he does kick her out. Now, in those days, David's daughters, who were still awaiting marriage, wore a particular kind of clothing. So when he kicks her out, she rips up that clothing that she's wearing that identifies her as a virgin in King David's court. And so she is absolutely distraught. Absalom finds her and takes her back home. So she has a place to be. In the meantime, the question has to be asked, why was Amnon so hating of her? Okay. Here's a couple of possibilities. Number one, she did not desire him. She fought him, did not want the relationship. And so if he was wanting to be desired and was not, then perhaps he hated her because of that. Perhaps it's his propensity to want to use other people. Since he's already used her, the power is there. Then when she wants to make a suggestion on how things could continue, then that puts her in the driver's seat. Now she's making suggestions. He doesn't want her to make suggestions. He wants her to go away. Or maybe, did he just feel guilty? Did he feel so badly about what he had done that he sent her away? My best guess is one of the first two. Probably the problem of pride and the problem of power. I'm going to do what I want to do, and you're not going to have anything to say about it. So now she has moved in with Absalom, her brother. And Absalom says something that's really odd. Look at verse 20, 2 Samuel 13. Here is the older brother. Now this is her full brother, same mother. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has that Amnon, your brother, been with you? Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart." Tamar lived in her brother's Absalom house as a desolate woman. I think that it's indicative of how men do not understand what lovemaking is like for women, that he would say something like that. Just leave it alone. Amnon's your brother. Don't make it public. Don't make a scene. Don't make a problem. Just come stay with me. Now, in the background, Absalom is putting together a plan. He's going to take care of it himself. But to have said something like that to your sister when she has been taken advantage of by Amnon, it's hard to imagine that a young man would say that to his sister. All right, verse 23. I want us to read down to verse 29. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep herders were at Baal Hazor, near the borders of Ephraim, he invited all the king's sons to come there. Absalom went to the king and said, "Your servant has had shearers to come. Will the king and his attendants please join me?" "No, my son," the king replied. "All of us should not go. We would only be a burden to you." Although Absalom urged him, he still refused to go, but gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon come with us." The king asked him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom urged him, so he sent him Amnon and the rest of the king's sons. Absalom ordered his men, "Listen, when Amnon is in high spirits from drinking wine, and I say to you, strike Amnon down, then kill him. Don't be afraid. Haven't I given you this order? Be strong and brave." So Absalom's men did to Amnon what Absalom had ordered, and all the king's sons got up, mounted their mules, and fled. So Absalom has tried to set up a coup. He asked David to go. David says, "No, I'm not going to go." He says, "Well, at least let me take Amnon." Amnon is the heir apparent. So as soon as Absalom kills Amnon, Absalom is the next in line, besides the other guy that kind of disappeared on us. But Absalom is the next in line for the throne. When he is later on tries to take the kingdom from David, he makes the next move in this little chess match he's got going on. But he kills Amnon. His men would not readily have wanted to kill the heir apparent, but when they do, their boss is the new heir apparent. So all of this intrigue and this murder that's going on is kind of a violent coup to put in place Absalom as the next king over Israel. Now, David mourns for Amnon, his son, but he also is worried about Absalom. Absalom goes into exile and goes and lives in Geshur. There's a king there that is willing to allow him to come and stay for a while. You remember when David was escaping Saul, and there was a king over toward that west coast where he went and stayed. So they're willing to allow that family, and they're willing to allow Absalom to come and to stay with them. But after a while, King David has finished mourning Amnon, and he begins to miss Absalom. And in the end, he will want Absalom to come back and be with him in the palace. He'll want him to come back and live in good standing again with the family. After all, Absalom is now the heir apparent to the throne. So David is going to make some mistakes based on his desire to have Absalom come and stay. Now, in the meantime, when Absalom runs away, there is a rumor that gets back to King David that they killed all of his sons. And David hears that, and of course he's just, ready to mourn them all. But eventually, the watchtower folks cry out to the king and say, "No, I see a bunch of folks coming down the side of the mountain over here." And sure enough, it was all the rest of David's sons mounted on their donkeys, hightailing it out to get away from Absalom. So Absalom only kills Amnon, the one that had taken advantage of his sister in the first place. So we have a revenge, but we also have this changing of the guard as far as the ones who are in charge of the kingdom. If David had never taken Bathsheba, would these things have happened? They're matters of intrigue, matters of family politics, matters of power, maybe, but the things that happen from here on with Absalom are directly prophesied by Nathan. We're going to get to that point where Absalom takes over David's place and embarrasses him publicly so that he can show that he's the one who really has the power. And Lord willing, we'll get into chapter 14 and following next week. Any questions or thoughts about any of that? A lot of intrigue going on in David's palace in those days. All right, if there's a way we can help you by way of a public response, just let us know as we stand and sing.